now, attachment theory, Rory. What is it? Why is it important?
Well, I think it's really interesting, and strangely enough, a lot of these theories, came about, after the Second World War. And attachment theory, how as children we make bonds to caregivers or to our parents, became prominent after the Second World War with a man called John Bowlby, who was asked by the World Health Organization to work with orphans from the war, refugees we may call them now, and there's a link to the today, isn't there? And how they were, how they attached to people emotionally. And he developed his theory of attachment theory. And I think that anybody who practices counselling should have a working knowledge of attachment, because we see it presented so often, I think, in the therapy room. And the thing about attachment theory, it can be a lifelong feeling that people have. Some people are well attached, and they have a ordinary attachment and they're fine. But some people really struggle with attachment, and this can play out into relationships. It can play out into their physical health, and ultimately can play out into their destiny. And having a real handle on attachment, I think, is essential, Ken.
I agree with you, Rory. And attachment theory can be tricky to explain and get your head around. And I guess, Rory, like you say, it's a lifetime. It's a theory one can visit again and again and again over the period of a lifetime. You can identify your own attachment style. You can maybe see attachment styles as they present in clients once you have an understanding. And Rory's prepared a really good handout on this, where you can actually look at the attachment styles and identify your own attachment style that you can get from this podcast episode. So we won't delve too much into what the theory of that is. You can go and look that up in the handout. But attachment style is really interesting in that if we go back to the original experimentation that was done, and I guess it's behavioral in a way, where we look at a behavior, but then we look at what coping mechanisms have maybe come about to cope with that behavior. And the original experimentation done with children, as you say, Rory, and looking at the reaction of a child when the primary caregiver, in most cases the mother, I guess, in the experimentation, would leave the room. When a stranger would come in the room, what would the child do? And looking at the child's reaction to the primary caregiver, I guess, retracting or going away. And it's really interesting. I've got two dogs. One of them is a German Shepherd, and my German Shepherd has an attachment cable. And that is that my German Shepherd his name is Boyd, and he'll run off when we go walking. He'll run off ahead of us because he's a guard dog, and that's what they do. But he'll only go so far. Then he stops and he looks and he makes sure that I'm there. And there is an attachment. There is an attachment. If I'm not there, he wants to know, where am I? And he's going to come looking for me. And I can kind of gauge how far ahead he will go. He won't just carry on going and going and going. There's almost an invisible cable, Rory, that holds him in place. My dog has an attachment.
Absolutely. And what you're speaking about, of course, is something called proximity maintenance. That was a term coined by, I think, John Bowlby, who said that small children will run, but we see this with our own children, and in my case, my grandchildren, where they will run away and they'll get so far, and it's literally, as you say, like an invisible cable. Then they stop and make sure you're there. And that is a quite a normal and healthy form of attachment. What they're doing, and what Boyd's doing, is exploring the world, but he's doing it with the safety of knowing you are there. And that would link into what we would call a secure attachment, or I'm okay and you're okay position. I'm okay, you're okay. And that's how children grow. And I think that it's when we have attachments that are maybe faulty or damaged that we have trouble forming relationships. And of course, counselling is the therapeutic relationship, isn't it? Sometimes it can play out in distrust. It can play out in being fearful. And some clients, may even not come to therapy because they have no trust at all. And I think it was interesting at the top of the conversation, Ken, you talked about the strange situations experiments carried out by Mary Ainsworth. And that's exactly what they did. They put a child into a room with the parent, brought a stranger in, the parent left, usually the mother at the time, mother left, and then they would observe how the child reacted, and then the stranger would leave and the mother would come back. And it's at that point they could see what kind of relationship the child had with the mother. And it coined at least 3 types of attachments: secure, avoidant, dismissive, ambivalent attachment. And in the 80s there was another form of attachment, which you can see in the handout, called disorganized attachment, where a child is maybe brought up in very, very poor circumstances and has real trouble attaching to anybody. It's a confusion. But I think it's pretty essential that people have a rough working knowledge of attachment, because it plays out not only in therapy but in our everyday life, I think.
Yeah, we're seeing it within ourselves in how we interact with others. And when you'll see more details in the handout, so we don't want to go too deep into the theory, but you spoke about secure attachment, Rory, and we, over half of the population, about 55% of the population, has this secure attachment, and kind of as a child they can be separate from the parent. They know it's okay. They can trust others. They've grown up in an environment that has shown them it's okay to trust other people. They'll go and they'll seek comfort from a parent when they're frightened, because they're okay going to another person and going, comfort me. They would prefer the people they know that are around them more than strangers, because I can trust you. You're my parent. And then as they grow up, they become adults, and they are more likely with that secure attachment to enjoy trusting, long-lasting relationships. They don't go in with a position of mistrust. But when we start looking at avoidant dismissive attachment, this is maybe a child who grew up in an environment where they learned that they cannot trust their primary caregiver for whatever reason that may be, and their behaviors alter according to that, and that is taken into adulthood. And you mentioned, Rory, of somebody that may not even come into therapy. I can't trust anybody, they may say. Everybody always lets me down. And if they do come into, and it's not to say they wouldn't enter therapy with avoidant dismissive attachment, many will, but you may see that presenting of everybody always lets me down. It's only a matter of time until people let you down. If you want a job doing, you have to do it yourself. I have a string of broken relationships because they always let me down. You're only okay when you're on your own. So we can kind of see the clues in that. And then ambivalent attachment style, which is again outlined in the handout. And when you identify your own attachment style, it kind of, I guess, illuminates a part of who you are. It's part of that self-development, Rory.
It does. I mean, in my training, it was one of the kind of highlight moments when we were asked to do our own attachment inventory. And it really started a really interesting conversation on 2 levels. Our close relationships we have with our friends and our family and that type of thing was one of the conversations, but the tutor quite quickly directed it into, well, how does this feature in the therapeutic relationship? If you have an avoidant dismissive attachment where you don't trust people, how are you going to build a therapeutic relationship with your client? What's going to happen? Now thankfully we didn't have anybody with the attachment style which was disorganized, but it can be. I mean, people come from very different upbringings, and I think it speaks to understanding your own attachment style and working with it. There's some really good news here. Is attachment style is a brain pathway. Yep. It's hardwired. It's hardwired into our brains, or it develops into our brains through the years. We can develop different attachment styles. We can alter the way we attach to people, and with therapy, and the other aspects of it, and I think this is really important, is that some people may have a great childhood and then have a really difficult traumatic situation which alters their attachment style. So it doesn't mean that someone whose attachment has been damaged or altered has had a very bad childhood. You could have victims of trauma who then go on not to trust people. So, I think it's one that we should personally consider. And also, I think it's one to discuss, in our training groups if we can, and also with our supervisor. If we're in practice, maybe you're starting in practice and you kind of recognize this, speak to your supervisor about it. It's not personal therapy. What it is working out how you form and sustain that therapeutic relationship with the feelings inside you have about others.
This is certainly a handout you want to hold in your hand. You want to print it out and you want to put it into your CPD file or your study file. It is Rory's super duper handout on what is your attachment style.